Okay, the time is 6:30, so we'll call this meeting of the Concord Finance Committee to order. We'll start with a call of the roll.
Suresh Bhatia. Peggy Griggs. Peggy. Kathy Poklow. Eric Dahlberg.
Present.
John Groffalo.
Here.
Beth Geyer.
Here.
Greg Guriello.
Here.
Don Kupka, I'm here. Lindsay Liss. Dee Ortner.
Present.
Carlin Reed.
Present.
Paul Rodriguez. Kwasi Sadruzaman.
Here.
Sri Tupul.
Present.
Lois Wassoff.
Present.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that is counted with one member on line. That's Pat Geyer. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a quorum. First item on the agenda is public comment. Does anybody have any public comment they'd like to share here in the room? And that's excluding public comment related to correspondence. Several folks are aware we're going to be discussing an item related to correspondence. Does anybody have comment related to anything else, guidelines or anything other than correspondence? How about online? Any hands up? Okay. We're going to take correspondence out of order. We typically take that at the end of the meeting. We received an email from a taxpayer who had some questions about the budget and the budget process and overfunded accounts. The town manager would like to respond to that email. She's going to join us and share her response. The taxpayer who submitted the email is also present, and he is welcome to join us as well after the town manager. But first, kind of a process note on this. This is one of several communications we received from this taxpayer who has questions about the budget and the budget process, town operations. I have not been able to distribute all of them to the Finance Committee yet. I myself have not had the chance to go through them all. I will do so. They are pretty detailed and extensive, lots of questions. Because there is such a significant volume of questions, we want to be responsive. We started this year by inviting public comment and questions. We want to be responsive and helpful when we can. Because there are so many questions, what I'd like to do first is take a step back, review all of this material to determine what falls within our purview as the Finance Committee and what it may make more sense to redirect to other parties in town, other boards and committees, staff, or other parties that we may think more appropriate. I've been in touch with Colin, who has graciously offered to lead that effort to review all of these communications and determine what makes sense to redirect where and what makes sense for us to take in-house. Because again, we want to be responsive and helpful. It's a lot. Our charge is very specific under the bylaws, as we all know. We're here to offer recommendations and analysis on matters of financial consequence to the town. We set the guideline, we hold hearings and make recommendations on warrant articles related to the budget, related to borrowing. We issue an annual report, we manage a small reserve fund, and we issue a 5-year tax projection. That's the lane we're in, and we have to stay in that lane. One, it's important to do so in a system of government like ours, and two, we have a lot of stuff we got to get done between now, especially now and January. So we have to stay focused. But again, we want to be helpful and responsive. So this is the approach I'd like to take with that goal in mind. Back to the piece of correspondence that was included in our packet. The town manager has a response.
Eric, can you grab a copy of the
Sure.
Thank you and good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to recent correspondence about town budget activity. The town of Concord is committed to transparency in managing public funds and ensuring all expenditures align with town meeting budget appropriations. This statement intends to clarify Concord's budgetary authority and control measures governing the town manager's authority over budget management as established under the town charter and annually through a vote of town meeting. The town's budget is approved annually by town meeting and voted in 16 distinct line items. The town manager is responsible for managing each line item's bottom line to ensure accountability. Under our budget process, line item appropriations approved by town meeting serve as budget cost centers. The budget book is organized to align closely with these line item appropriations, providing detailed information about each cost center. This alignment between the warrant, budget book, and expense tracking enables public transparency while maintaining a clear structure. In recent correspondence, I see references to overspending of specific account codes. For example, 5111 regular full-time salaries, 5319 other professional services. This level of budget detail is only included in the town's general ledger budget, not in budget books, not in the annual town meeting warrant, and therefore also not a part of the annual town meeting appropriations. Tracking these codes internally allows for operational management and control, but does not constitute separate appropriations. Further, to characterize any discrepancies found at this level of budget tracking as showing a general disconnect between what was represented to voters by the fiscal 24 budget book and what the town actually spent is simply not accurate. While I won't address each instance identified in the correspondence you received, I will offer some feedback to help clarify what is a basic misunderstanding of budget tracking. So in the police department, it is noted that 5111 is underspended, so perhaps overfunded, and that 5130, which is overtime, is overexpended and more costly to the town. The Concord Police Department has 36 full-time equivalent sworn officers budgeted, 19 of whom are assigned to patrol. Others serve in various capacities as school resource officers, detectives, community inspectors, etc. For the past several years, CPD has averaged 3 to 4 vacancies at a time and occasionally more. CPD runs 3 patrol shifts per day with a minimum of 3 patrol officers and 1 sergeant per shift. Shift vacancies, whether due to position savings or planned absences, must be filled. So while position vacancies create a savings in 5111, which is the full-time salary line, filling shifts through overtime because of them may result in a higher than budgeted expense in 5130. The resulting underspending in the full-time salaries and overspending in overtime reflect a staffing gap rather than excess costs. A better measure of budget performance would be to look at the combined spending to budget to actual of all personnel expense lines. I'd like to also make a few comments about some information relative to human resources staffing. The level of staffing in the HR department represents Concord's unique demands, and this certainly isn't the first time that the level of staffing has been questioned. Concord's HR headcount is higher than many peer communities for 2 reasons. We operate a very large recreation department. We have as many part-time, seasonal, and temporary staff in recreation as we do full-time staff in our general fund. This creates a heavy workload, particularly seasonally in HR. Also, I wanted to make mention of system limitations. Concord's reliance on outdated systems creates substantial manual workload in HR, resulting in duplicative processes and increased labor needs. We are in the process of moving many HR functions and payroll to our Munis ERP, which will consolidate and streamline processes. Recently, we reported to the Select Board that as a result of this work, we will eliminate the need for ADP, payroll software, and Cornerstone HRIS software, resulting in a savings of more than $100,000 a year, and we do also expect the reduction of 1 FTE through attrition. Finally, I wanted to make a mention of the fiscal 25 budget. I would like to end and express that there isn't anybody who's more frustrated about the fact that we don't have a fiscal 25 budget book than our CFO and myself. Transition within the finance department and the labor-intensive method which we traditionally use to prepare the budget book, believe it or not, we prepare the budget book in PowerPoint. I would imagine most people would never even dream of preparing a budget book in that kind of software. So to generate this book has been, these are significant contributing factors. Again, the software and the staffing. While we remain committed to producing a budget book in fiscal 25, we cannot provide a specific timetable as we are now actively engaged in preparing for fiscal 26. Looking ahead, we are implementing the ClearGov platform, maybe you've seen that already, which will allow us to build and more easily publish a GFOA-compliant budget book. This new platform will streamline our process and improve accessibility, enabling residents to review a comprehensive digital version of Concord's budget. In closing, I ask that you keep the following in mind. Although the standard budget book is delayed, a detailed budget remains accessible and posted in our general ledger, and it's right here. We continue to track and monitor Concord's fiscal 25 budgeted expenditures with the same diligence and care we apply every year. Thank you for allowing me to take a few moments at your meeting to address the correspondence you received.
Thank you. Okay, the taxpayer who submitted the correspondence, I'll give him the opportunity to respond, but we want to be respectfully, I'd ask you to keep it brief, and we don't want to have a debate or a discussion. I'd appreciate if you could let us know how you feel about our approach to resolving this. I want to make sure it's
No, this is fine.
satisfactory. Okay.
Very fine. I appreciate it very. Can you guys hear me? Sorry. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. It's a lot for me to respond, just to what I heard. I guess one point is.
Hang on one sec. Could you provide your name and address?
Thank you very much. Miguel Echevarri, homeowner at 255 Commonwealth Ave. So yeah, I guess the books have been produced in PowerPoint. But those were the same books that earlier this year the Bridge had said that had done an article that we had an award for excellence on it. And the reason I kind of bring that up is the email you guys haven't seen is, first, I own a small data company. I've done it for like 30 years, that along with FOIA services. And one of the things I'm more concerned about is really the validity of the data, which does impact you guys and your ability on the baseline to set a budget. And so the reason I brought up my experience was earlier this year, like a few months ago, I had asked for the last 5 years available budget information in spreadsheets. So I wasn't asking for the budget books. And I only got it through 24. So if we do have it in 25, man, I would love to see that and update it into my Access database. But the thing is once I started going through well, first of all, I sat on the data, then I heard you guys were looking for more transparency and public input. So I inputted the data into Access. That's what started generating those slew of questions, all right? And to tell you the truth, I had already answered the one about the police, and I won't get into the other ones because those are more at the micro level. As I started looking at the data, I started becoming a little bit more concerned that what's the integrity of it? I know we had gone through a conversion of the data, I know that the 25 budget book wasn't put out, even though we had just won some awards for the 22 budget book. So, it's something, we were pretty good at doing. I know that when I asked for the actual data behind the budget book, it wasn't provided. And it just seemed to me that there is maybe something wrong. So basically, my only point is, of course, I want answers to the questions, and when you see the emails, there are quite a few questions, okay? But I kind of want you guys, or the town, to consider that might be something wrong at the base level of the information. Did something happen when we were converting the data? I don't know. I'm not in a position to answer that. I am in a position to tell you that data is not available. And so basically my only thing that I want to, my email does show a bunch of other departments and stuff like that, kind of to show where else funding is going. But I kind of think we need to be putting a lot of significant funds towards our finance department, because they need to first of all come back and say, okay, Miguel, yeah, no, you're overreacting, okay, or they need to say, oh, there is kind of an issue, and this is what we're going to need to fix it. So that's kind of really what I'm coming to say to you guys. So yeah, I got a bunch of questions, but at the macro level, we need to look at the data itself. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And like I said, we will, we'll take a look at all your questions, and we'll be in touch about the ones we're able to take on, the ones we think should be redirected. So thank you. Okay, back to our agenda. Item number 3, Economic Vitality Committee update. We invited Mike Lawson, the chair of the Economic Vitality Committee, to provide an overview of what the committee's been working on and their priorities, specifically in the context of revenue generation, which is one of our priorities for this year, one of the priorities we set for ourselves at the start of the year. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
It's a pleasure. My name is Mike Lawson. I live at 1695 Lowell Road. I am the chair of the Economic Vitality Committee, but for the record, I'm also a member of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust and Concord's representative to the States Commission for the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution. But I'm here tonight to talk about economic vitality. I have a set of slides. Who's the slide puncher?
You can just say
Next. All right. What I tried to do is lay out what the economic vitality does based on its charge. And what you can see first is to examine the ways we can attract, sustain, and promote local businesses in our business districts. We also examine ways the town can promote and encourage tourism, which is a vital source of revenue to the town. The committee also considers the roles that other disciplines play in accomplishing these goals and collaborate with those departments as needed. I mention this particularly because almost anything that this committee would come up with would have to go to another department, like the planning department for zoning changes or NRC for things like that. So that's quite important. And the bottom note there, I should note, the committee does not have development responsibilities as part of its charge. Next, please. Our approach is to preserve, enhance, and transform, and we try to do it through serving visitors and residents to meet their shopping needs, focused on mixed use, including small-scale retail, restaurants, service. You can read that particular bullet, and focus on existing commercial centers along the transit routes. I was a member of the select board when this committee was created, and it was very important at the time that the town wanted a clear distinction between development and the vitality of our existing business centers, and that's the way this particular committee was created. Next, please. Our core areas of organizing for action are, you can see here, communication, marketing, recruiting and retention, policy and regulations, and Concord's 250 and the Economic Vitality Committee. We are undertaking a number of actions that we think will be helpful to the business community. A new web portal is available, and you can see it on the town website. It's quite good. And beginning in 2025, we will host a quarterly business roundtable to share information and build relationships among the various groups in town that have an interest in this, not just our committee, but the planning committee, the business partnership, the the Chamber of Commerce and others that you can see there. We mirrored this on what we did in housing. You'll know that Concord has a number of housing organizations in town. And when the trust was established, we used the trust to kind of put these groups together and create a housing roundtable that meets quarterly that tries to focus the issues affecting the housing community. And we're hoping to do the same thing with this partnership. We developed a questionnaire that'll be going out shortly to gather detailed information about local businesses to try to better understand what their needs are. In policy and regulations, we're proposing a change in parking regulations, a zoning change that would allow secondary use in industrial zones. What that means, for example, is if you had a brewery, they could actually sell beer, T-shirts, or if you had a soap company, they could sell soap, that kind of stuff. Okay? Lobbying the Select Board and the MCI Advisory Board regarding the MCI water treatment facility. We believe this is a critically important action for the town, and we're confident tonight that the Advisory Committee is fully aware of this, and as too as the Select Board. And propose changes to the structure of the sewer improvement fees. It's a very complicated construction sewer improvement fees, but they tend to be real inhibitors to business vitality and continuation in town. And then with respect to the 250th, we're working with local businesses to prepare for the celebration and to provide food safety grants for food service. There's a lot of preparations, as you know. I'm sure you must be getting briefed on some of the 250 stuff, but road closures, when can businesses get deliveries to get prepared for that long weekend? So economic development, you recall I said earlier, we really don't have this as part of our charge. Concord faces significant additional expenditures, as I know you know, for improvements in town services and facilities. And given the composition of the town's revenue sources, funding these expenditures will place a significant burden on the property tax rate. This seems unavoidable, and if we are to ensure the future of the town, it probably won't be necessary. Economic in town can help, but large-scale development in Concord is, in my view, very unlikely and will not generate sufficient revenue to offset the impact of property taxes. Indirect taxes from commercial activity generate less than $2 million in town. Commercial and industrial properties contribute approximately just 10% of the total property levy, and small business districts just make up about 3% of the land in town. Concord faces significant challenges to economic developments, which I've tried to outline on the next slide. And I will note that the first 5 of those come directly from Envision Concord, not something that was generated by the Economic Vitality Committee. So they're long-standing and well-known challenges to development. I've added a few more that have come up in the discussions of the Economic Vitality Committee. Insufficient cell coverage in the downtown is a serious public safety and business issue. Residents are concerned about that development will destroy the historic character of the town, and water treatment is currently above capacity and until resolved will likely forestall major developments. Those challenges, I think, need to be taken quite seriously. Nevertheless, there are opportunities to capitalize on in town. We have walkable neighborhoods. We have commuter rail stations, plus the Bruce Freeman and the reformatory trails that have lots of access. We have very low commercial vacancies and a mix of business types. And we have a very engaged commercial set of landlords, and we own our own municipal light plant. Those are all very positive aspects which I hope we can capitalize on. And then there are actions that can be taken to help economic development and vitality in town. We can work to ensure that the MCI property is developed to help Concord's financial position. We know that housing and business will generate revenue for the town, but I hope we can keep in mind it will also generate costs. We need to work to get 229 Main Street online for some type of development. It won't be a panacea, but it can help. We can support actions that can make it easier for businesses to come to Concord and to stay. As I mentioned earlier, parking regulations, permitting, and sewer improvement fees. For example, in parking, the proposal that we're going to advance and have spoken to the planning board about is to essentially eliminate parking regulations in the business districts. Those regulations do not generate parking spots. All they do is cause businesses to spend money to go get waivers for the parking they can't provide. Increased tourism. Tourism is an important part of what Concord is about. And we have 1,600,000 people that come right near us all the time. And we get coming into town directly a relatively small fraction. We should work very hard to get some larger percentage of the 1 million folks that visit the national park and the 600,000 folks that visit Walden Pond. And we need to more effectively leverage Concord's art and cultural organizations. And I would add one more that I just learned from the town manager at the business partnership meeting that we both attended yesterday. And that is I don't know if it's been in front of the pilot for, is it okay for me to pick up the idea of payment in lieu of taxes for some of our large not-for-profit organizations that really command a lot of town services. So that could be another important action that could be taken. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Questions for Mike? Colin?
Mike, thanks for the presentation. You listed a number of actions that the Economic Vitality Committee is exploring. Is reuse of the Peabody School at all on your radar? And if so, what have you talked about?
We know about it, but it hasn't been a discussion topic of late. Again, we heard a little bit about it from the town manager at the business partnership meeting. I'm sure it will be one. And I think we need to be very careful about thinking how that can best benefit the town. So I know there'll be a lot of options for it, and I'm confident that it'll get the discussion it deserves.
Other questions?
Mike, thank you again for the presentation.
Sure, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Just question, the current retail shops, how are they doing? Is that a challenge? I mean, are they having challenges right now? So is the priority bringing in more foot traffic or bringing in more business? What would be the
Well, there's both. There's some normal turnover that happens in a town like this. Businesses just don't survive. It's very difficult because what Concord doesn't have is it doesn't have large-scale businesses here. And those large-scale businesses, whether you like them or not, have an advantage, and that is economies of scale. The kind of businesses we have in town here, the non-banking and real estate businesses, they're small. They're by themselves, or there's another branch of them somewhere. So it's very difficult. They have to eat all the capital costs, all the permitting costs. Everything has to be eaten right here in this town. So there's always a churn. But there are impediments to businesses coming in here. Rents are high, land values are very high. The permitting process is very complicated in this town. When Cafe Nero came in here, it was a very controversial thing, those of you who were around. And we had an opening ceremony in front of Cafe Nero, and the owner of the place told me it was the most complicated and difficult process of coming into any town he'd ever experienced. But he wasn't complaining in the sense of saying you're trying to get me here. It was just complicated. So we have both. We have water sewer issues. Businesses change. It used to be a cafe, and now it's some kind of clothing retail store, and then it goes back, and those fees change depending upon what constitutes the composition of it. So it's just a complicated process. These are little, small businesses in a relatively small town. So it's a complicated process, and we need to work very hard with planning to try to eliminate some of these barriers like parking. I mean, I think that's a really good example. You go in, you have to have X number of spots. Well, you can't make spots. So you have to figure out something. I heard from a member of one of our boards that he was affiliated with an organization in town. What they did was they went and leased parking spaces from one of the churches in town. That's a business expense for them. There is nobody that goes to that store that knows they're supposed to park in the church parking lot, right? So it's just an added expense and an added burden for the town. Doesn't do anybody any good. Let's get rid of it. Yes.
Mike, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation and your historical perspective on the formation of the committee and its mission. I'm really glad that you're doing this. Just a brief comment on parking, and it's that Concord Center has a lot of parking provided by the town, and I think that works really, really well for waiving of parking requirements. The center has become increasingly congested since the planning board has waived parking requirements for specifically the library project, the Concord Academy expansion, and the Emerson Umbrella were all waived, and now there's no place to park because all the street parking is filled with the users of those. And sometimes cars, I know I myself could take 20 minutes to get through downtown, which is ridiculous. So I think that we need to be mindful where we actually are, the town is providing parking, or where it waive it in those circumstances, but don't waive it where there is no parking available because we're creating an impediment to people being able to reach the stores, the shops. Thanks.
Well, I can tell you that when I was on the Finance Committee, one of my fun times, and when I was on the Select Board, and now when I'm on this, parking has been a difficult issue for this town as long as I've been here. When I was on the Select Board, we had new parking meters, and the issue was, do you want parking or parking meters? You don't want parking meters, and every time we had a surveyor went to find out it was a 50-50 split. We had a hardcore no parking meters Bill Montague in town, which many of you might remember, and the town went the other way and put them in, and now the town's gone back there, and the planning board has a big parking study that they're engaging with and hiring an outside consultant, and I'm suspecting when that gets put forward, we'll have another controversy, and it'll be about a 50-50 split about what we should do, so point well taken.
Other questions for Mike? Dee?
Yeah, just a quick one, Mike. With regards to Walden Pond and the national parks and trying to attract people to come into the town, have you developed any strategies as yet?
No, we haven't, but we did, there was a strategy, and the strategy was to provide, I don't think it went as far as Walden Pond, but I think it did go to the North Bridge, and that was a trolley service that could bring people. Because the buses park up at the National Park when they go there, and there's a big parking lot, as you well know, at Walden Pond. But I don't think the trolley went to Walden Pond. It went from West Concord to Concord here, but it had 1 year. I don't honestly know why it wasn't, but I'm confident we can work out a way because we can't have these buses going up there and coming into town. When we fought for years to finally get a parking spot in front of Wright Tavern and then over back in the Kaiser Road parking lot. So there's limited bus parking in town, so we need some way to get these guys into town to have lunch, do a little shopping, get back out to their bus and, go to the Battle Road Visitor Center, wherever they're headed next. So, I think to me, that's the solution of getting some inside the town transportation that can move these people around, as opposed to Beth Williams, is our tourism officer, and she's doing a great job in marketing and getting people to come into town, and I'm sure it'll be successful, but they're right up the road here. Yeah. They should be easier to capture than trying to get them to come in from Burlington or someplace.
So, of all of those strategies that you're looking at, have you given them an order? Have you given them priorities? Things that would be available for the 250th?
I
Like the Walden Pond and National Park, getting people into town.
Well, I think it's a proposal we need to help develop and push forward, and I know Beth is working on that. And, you know, she's an officer of the town, so she's working on that. And it hasn't gotten to us as a specific item yet, but I'm sure it will.
Okay, thank you.
One more question, Mike. Given our narrow scope that we talked about on the previous agenda item, or our narrow scope notwithstanding, is there anything that the Finance Committee can do to help you in partnership with your committee, given we share the same goal of revenue generation?
I think the town has announced that they're going to have an economic development forum in January. Am I correct, Mayor? January 22nd. I would encourage us to get as much factual and data information about the town's ability to generate real economic development, as opposed to a new store going in where that clothing store in Walden was. I can't remember its name, but Fat Face. You know, that's good. We'll handle that. Economic Vitality Officer Mimi Graney is here. She'll do that kind of stuff. But I think the most important thing for me is getting as many facts, financial facts, data facts on the table. I'll give you a very brief example of how it doesn't work. Years ago, when I was on the select board, it looked like 229 Main Street was going to be a little more here than it is. And so we decided that the federal government was actively engaged with us in the EPA. And so we decided we would have a forum where people would come in and talk about what they thought we should do with 2229 Main Street. We had it in the hearing room up here. People came, I can't remember the total number, but maybe 40 people, something like that. Everybody said what they wanted, and we divided up 2229 Main Street, so everybody got a little piece of it. Right. And it was, my view, nobody else's, a complete disaster. I mean, it wasn't thought through with facts, and it wasn't thought through strategically. And we can't make the same mistake again with MCI Concord or with 2229, and I'm confident we won't. But we need to approach this issue of economic development soberly, with facts and with data, to really understand our town and what our town wants. And I hope the Finance Committee can help with that.
Definitely. If there are inputs that we can provide, let's work together.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. Our next agenda item is item number 4. This is the town's response to our FY26 budget information request. Recall at our last meeting of October 24th, we heard from the schools, including Minuteman, on their responses to our request. Tonight, we'll hear from the town on that same request.
Thank you. So Anthony Insaldi, Chief Financial Officer, Kerry LaFleur, our town manager, is behind me. Just make sure he... Here we go. All right, so this is, what we wanted to do is kind of put together a response to your guidelines, but also a little bit of a financial forecast, and really talk about something that I didn't really see us talking about last year too much, is revenues with that. So the first thing, the agenda is obviously to address all of the issues that the letter had requested of the town manager. While not every slide will have an answer for each of the subject matters that you requested, we can provide some oral updates with that. So the first thing I want to do is a 5-year revenue forecast. You know, where we get the money comes in 4 different areas: property taxes, state aid, local receipts, and other financing sources. So this first slide is property taxes and how we calculate the levy. And how we calculate the levy is how the Division of Local Service tells us to calculate the levy. And it's basically, we work off of the prior year levy, we add 2.5% increase, then we add new growth, and that produces the levy limit. Then less debt exclusions, I'm sorry, that should add the debt exclusions. Then that's the maximum allowed of the levy is the 120 million. And then projecting property tax use, the base is 106 million, then less, that should say add the debt exclusions, and that gives us the total projected tax levy. The next line is our unused levy capacity, and then the total tax levy on the bottom. And what I did is I carried that through all 5 years. One of the, really the only variable with this is new growth. Last year, we projected, I believe it was $950,000. New growth got certified this year at 1.2. That's a great problem to have, right? That's a positive. But as we carry forward, we're carrying $1 million, although there is some projects, as you know, and Kerry can add to this, that's in the works, but they're not permitted. So we don't count on something until we actually have the ball rolling. So hopefully those kick in, and then that will increase our new growth estimates. State aid, so this is basically when you hear of cherry sheets and so forth, this is basically what the state gives us and how they give it to us. So the top portion is what they give, and on the bottom is what they charge back to us. And the bottom line is the net state aid. And I project this out, and what I use is about a 2.5% growth factor in state aid. That's been pretty consistent with the last few years, so I feel comfortable right now going with that. Obviously, that's subject to change as things happen in the future with the economy and so forth. Local receipts. Our biggest driver of local receipts is motor vehicle excise tax. What I did on that is I looked at the prior years, and then I projected about a 4% growth in motor vehicle excise tax. Now, our next biggest thing is interest, and if you can see, I went down for next year. Why? Because interest rates have ticked down. So that's going to affect us, too, on what we've have benefited from in the past couple of years with good returns. And then the various other local taxes that we have. Then we have our other financing sources, and really what this is transfers from our enterprise funds, our water, sewer, BD center, recreation. That's their portions of our services. And then there's fee, rental, and various other permits and fees that we have. And again, I projected this out, really not jumping it too much, because it's again, it's a variable, it's a moving target. And I should have started with everything that I have in here is super conservative. So, and that's the way that we really want to budget in municipal government, is stay conservative. It's always, you plan for the worst and you hope for the best, right? So the 5-year revenue forecast, those are the areas grouped together. And then that was what we're projecting revenue to look like over the next 5 years. On the expenditure side, there's the 4 areas that we have as part of the budget: the town government, joint accounts, schools, and capital outlay. Town government, what I did is basically just use the 4% increase year to year. That's not necessarily what we're asking, that's just a forecast. Why did I pick 4%? Well, cost of living is increased this year by 2.5%. There are steps in lanes, and you've heard that, and really with personnel making up, somewhere in the vicinity of 80+% of the budget, we want to make sure that we have enough covered, and then continue the same level of services that we provide. So that's why I just selected 4% right now. On the joint account side, the biggest change from FY25 to FY26 is group insurance. As you recall, last year we switched from Minuteman Neshoba Health Group to Meyer. We thought we'd see more of a savings than we did. We still did, but it actually was a little bit higher by call it about $160,000, $175,000, just ballpark. So what I did is, what we have for early projections from Meyer is 10 to 12% increase. So I factored in the 8.1 and change, and then I added the 12% onto that. Again, going for the worst-case scenario on health insurance. And then for the out 4 years, I just did I believe I did 8% per year for each of the other 4 years. Property and property liability insurance, I think you'll recall, we said last year that we had a really big jump. It was over 20% in that. Right now, I'm carrying about a 10%. And, one of the problems with these numbers is we don't get the data. So, we don't know what Maya's gonna come out. That doesn't come out till, after the first of the year at some point. And even our property and liability insurance. We reach out, we try to get it, every community does. It's a little early, but we try to go with some of percentages increases that we hear from other communities and from those carriers too, as a guess. The only other thing I want to point out is we have a decrease from FY '25 to FY '26 in Social Security and Medicare. I'm happy to say that Concord no longer is paying Social Security for non-pensionable employees. It's more part-time. Starting July, we went to what's called OBRA, which is basically a self-funded retirement plan that they contribute to. By doing that, and this is something that's really been on the books for decades, but we're able to save $175,000 this year. So that really helps with some of our additional expenses that we think are going to happen with the group insurance. So that's in the positive. Retirement is, Kerry, we still scheduled 32? 31. 31. Debt service, those are what we're carrying from within the levy, and then the bottom section is excluded debt, and that does include, those numbers do include the last tranche of, not the last, but the third tranche of funding for the middle school, third or fourth, for the middle school project. I would expect we may have, once the project's over, a little bit more, but that will come down the road, probably next fiscal year or maybe in the year after, depends. Schools, I did the same thing for the schools as I did for the town. I just increased it at 4% just to see what that would look like. Tier 1 capital, in the original slides I sent, I know I sent you an updated packet because I was kind of playing around a little bit with going a little different than what our policy says. So per the Concord's policy, it's 3% of the prior year budget. So on the bottom section of that is the calculation for that. And as you recall, when we came before the tri-boards about what our goal would be is, two things, right? It was to have the capital outside of the guidelines, and we were really shooting for a 3%, to hit that 3% mark. In looking at the numbers, a little concerned about the 3% mark on the total of if we use the Concord policy, so I wanted to look at a different approach. And I just wanted to see if we just did 3% of just the town schools budget. So that's just a working model just to kind of see where the numbers would fall in that. So the next slide is just really just grouping all together on the 5-year forecast with revenue, expenses, our capital, if that's going with the optional plan that I was playing with, our OPEB, and then what we would start to be tapping into our unused levy capacity, which I think this board has discussed in previous years, is that at some point in time we may get to that point where we just run out of levy capacity, and then you're talking with a lot of communities are talking about as a potential override. I don't think we're there yet, but it's always good to project the worst and just talk about that. So in summary here, with the 5-year budget forecast, the assumptions, just to recap, the revenues, new growth remains constant, and that, I expect that to increase. State aid, it's just the 2.5%. Motor vehicle excise being the biggest driver of our local receipts was growth at 4%. and then the decline in their interest revenue because of the interest rates going down. On the expense side, again, town schools all grow at 4%. Health insurance adjusted for FY '25, that's a 12% increase, worst case scenario. We hope a worst case scenario. And then the property liability grows at 10%. And then again, I mentioned Social Security, Medicare, so we got a little 5% growth factor there, and that's after recognized $175,000 savings that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So Carrie, I don't know if you want to touch upon the, some of the projects that are coming up that may factor into our new growth.
Oh, okay, so we have two 40B projects, which I'm sure you are well aware of. The Novo 40B project, that has been approved through the ZBA. They actually have a modification of that project in front of the ZBA, I think, coming up next month. So I would expect, the beginning of the year, in the spring, we would see a building permit issuance and hopefully then would be able to adjust our new growth numbers. But, this is a sizable project that would add to the tax base more than $1 million a year in property taxes, on top of a significant one-time building permit fee, but again, one time. The other 40B project, the Thoreau project out on the Acton line, that is on a little bit of a slower path. They are, I believe, also in front of the ZBA next month, but again, several months behind the Novo project. So it would be highly unlikely that we would be taking anything into account in the forecast this go-round because of that project. The MCI Concord, obviously, that's going. That'll keep us excited. That will be something, but we are a long time away from being able to project any revenue associated with that.
So another request of this board was free cash. As you can see, we're heading in the right direction. Last year's free cash was certified at $9.8 million. That's good news considering it was low, and with our reserves, very, very low. It's really important to maintain this in order to maintain our AAA bond rating. You may recall when Moody's did reaffirm our AAA bond rating, but there was a comment about our reserves. So, and I think I mentioned that last year with some of our financial policies, and one of those is really working free cash and building those reserves, a capital stabilization, a debt stabilization, because the next slide, when we talk about capital, you're going to see what's coming up in the next 10 years. So with that, this is really just a high-level number, and this includes our enterprise funds. So, it's big, and it also includes 2 building projects and a potential 5-year debt exclusion road project. So this is $389 million, but remember, that's everything. So don't get hung up on that number, and that's raw data. We haven't even analyzed all the requests, but it's really good to go through this practice, because what we're doing, what all departments are doing, is they're really laying out the 10 years, so we know exactly what's coming on the horizon. And when you'll see this in ClearGov, hopefully you'll be able to drill down and actually see all the work that departments did as far as not just asking for money, but backing up with quotes, vehicle inventories, what our policy is on replacements and refurbishments of fire trucks, all these things that now you're going to be able to see what's coming down the road. And the departments did a really good job in putting their capital plans together, and now we just have a lot of work to do in working it out.
Can I just make
Sure.
a couple of comments? So that totaled almost $390 million, again, over 10 years. 166.5 of it is enterprise fund projects, so funded through enterprise fund revenue. Some of that from retained earnings, so money they've set aside for depreciation. The rest of it would come in increased rates if those projects went forward, and that is inclusive of the $50 million that was approved at this past town meeting for the water filtration plant, if that project goes forward. So that means about $222.6 million is general funded. 118.6 of that is facilities. And again, Anthony mentioned the public works, public safety. But we have also done a complete analysis of all of our buildings too. So that is, anything that needs to be done here as well. So that leaves about $104 million. So over 10 years, $10 million a year. It does also include an additional $5 million a year for roads. So when you look back at what we have been doing, which is about $4 to $5 to $6 million a year, it's not significantly different. It does not include the schools, and we met with the superintendent and finance director yesterday, and in their 5-year plan, they have, about $6 million, I believe is what we saw. And a lot of that is energy efficiency projects. So they have a lot of big lighting projects, $500,000 big lighting projects that we hope to have funded through an ESCO. We are going out for RFP to hire an energy services company to come in and talk to us about our energy efficiency projects and how we might get those funded. Hopefully sometime we'll have our facilities and sustainability director come and talk to you about this project. Very excited. We're funding the hard costs through our ARPA grant, and we're working collaboratively with the schools. So the schools, in the first couple of years, it's more like $500,000 to $600,000 to $700,000. So again, it's a big number. You're seeing 10 years versus 5 years. You're seeing the enterprise funds and everything, but it's not awful.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it is awful, but it's not. It's explainable.
So another point that you requested is talking about potential excluded debt projects, and the 3 that I mentioned are listed right there. And the numbers, especially for the building projects, are really just estimates at what the study determined square footage that we would need for each of those buildings. And then, the going rate, is probably around $1,000 a square foot for public construction. So that's, we just had them throw a placeholder out there now, and I asked them to throw it in 28, but it's 28 means we'd have to have land, and, so that's kind of a moving target too. But those would be 3 projects that we potentially could have. And then on the.
Can you just go to the chart?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to talk a minute about OPEB and pension, which is actually showing on this. So this is a comparison of AAA-rated communities. I pulled in all of the Moody's AAA-rated, and then we pulled in some of the S&P AAA-rated communities, ones that are closer to us or ones that we typically use for salary comparisons. So on OPEB, other post-employment benefits, this is the liability for retiree health insurance. As of our last valuation date, which right now is 1/1/23, our OPEB liability is 61.27% funded. So there's an unfunded liability of about $19.5 million. We use a 6.75% discount rate. I think you heard from the school at your last meeting. They also use a 6.75 discount rate. I think this is the first time we've both used the same rate. So we expected to have this liability fully funded by fiscal '23. We do a level annual payment in the general fund of $1,329,000, and we're in the process of updating our funding letter with our actuary, and within the next probably couple of months, we'll have something. It's probably not going to be that different, but that's what we've been doing. It's been really nice because it smooths it. Well, it's flat. We're not increasing that at all. So, unlike health insurance, we're not seeing increases in that. So then on the retirement side, using our last valuation date of 1/1/24, so a year newer, we are 93.09% funded. We are on a fully funded amortization schedule where we would be funded fiscal '31. After that, then we see about a $1 to $1.5 million drop in the annual assessment for retirement. So that's great. So up here, you can see in comparison to our peers, we are rock stars when it comes to funding these long-term liabilities. I did put another sheet in the packet, but I don't think that we have a slide. It's the last thing in the packet, and I think it's worth just a quick mention. There is some additional information, some additional comparisons. I think it's important to point out that a lot of our peer communities are funding at the levy limit. They have almost no excess levy capacity. They may have free cash higher than us. Some have significantly more free cash, but you look and their long-term liabilities are far less funded. So I think it's all about the decisions that the community makes. Concord has decided to fund its long-term liabilities on a much faster schedule than other communities, and that's why we retain our AAA rating when we're not looking so good in some of these other areas. What I will tell you that is very important to Moody's, and I think anybody who works in this field, Moody's is like the gold star rating in municipal. S&P is a lower level rating, even though they're both AAA ratings. Moody's likes Concord, aside from our demographics and our wealth. They like the fact that our cumulative percent of debt retired in 10 years is very high. And if we start monkeying around with that and start easing up on funding our long-term liabilities, we're going to see, they're going to look at us differently because we don't have the level of free cash that the other communities have, although it's good, and I would expect we will be probably pushing $11 million when it's certified this year, because we have about town budget a return of about $1.5 million that we'll see. So that will start looking good. Stabilization fund balance, you can see, this is just general purpose stabilization fund. We have $5 million in the middle school stabilization fund. These other communities, they have bigger stabilization funds, but again, their other metrics are not looking as good as us. So that's what I wanted to mention there. Thank you.
We're happy to answer any, land acquisition, do you want to mention the land?
Oh, you do, you ask every year about our land acquisition fund. And we have a land fund, and in years past, I do believe, and I'm talking, prior decade, I do believe the town used to set aside funding for land acquisition, and maybe significant funding. We no longer do that. When we have a piece of a land purchase, and we haven't had one in a few years, those have just been coming through our capital. We're not actively setting aside funding for land purchases. We do have about $20,000 at this point. What we use that for is appraisals or other due diligence if we are looking at property. So right now, we're looking at the Harrington House. Maybe doing something with the Harrington House. So we're going to do an appraisal. We're looking at Peabody. We'll do an appraisal. Those types of things are funded through the land fund, but we are not actively setting aside money for land purchase.
Okay, questions? We'll go around. Shri, and we can always come back to you. Any questions off the top? Shri? Dee?
Not at the moment.
Greg?
Skip real quick, because I'm gonna try to find the page that Carla and I had a question.
Okay.
40.
Page 41. It's something that just jumped out at us, but that's fine. It's the hidden value.
Yeah, so page 41, the in lieu of taxes doubles every year?
Under local
Under
receipts.
local receipts?
So what I did is, because we're working on a pilot policy, and I started with a low dollar amount, and I'm hoping that over the next 5 years, and I went lower than I think that we'd all like in that area, because as I pointed out to the select board at the last meeting, I think the total dollar amount that we're looking for or potentially could get at the 25% of the assessed value for those nonprofits was about 1.5 million. So those numbers are extremely low, but I did double them in hopes that we make some great progress in having nonprofits partner with us.
Gotcha, so that's why it doubles every year, just, okay, gotcha.
Well, more than doubles. It goes from
Well, it doubles
25,000
every year,
to
it doubles.
800,000. Oh, I
Right,
see.
250 to 50,
Got
50 to
it. That's
100,
what's
every
going on.
year it's
Okay.
doubling.
Less than 5 years. Hopefully in 5 years, we can come back and say that we got even more than that.
Okay, gotcha.
Colin?
Okay, I'm terrified. And here's why. It looks like in fiscal year '28, our expenses will exceed our revenue based on these projections. Now, that usually means doing one of two things, either revising the estimates from 4% downward and then pressuring the departments and the town committees to reduce their budgets and to hold their budgets lower, so we stretch that line out, or else we start now preparing for an override. How do you come up with the 4% figure? Is it reasonable to lower that? Or if it isn't reasonable to do that, how can we start preparing now to convince, if this is appropriate, that an override will be coming in 2.5 years? Because that's what I'm seeing on this. That's why this 5-year forecast is really valuable, but it's got me worried. What do you think?
Yeah, so the 4% was, again, I mentioned that, you know, looking at personnel cost and COLAs and steps, that's why I went with the high. You know, I do think that 4% is high. You know, your guidelines last year was what, 3.26? So if you gave us 4, great, we don't expect it. So again, that's why you shoot high. The second part of your question is how do we plan for it? You know, it's great that we're on the right trend with our free cash, because then we can start putting money into capital stabilization. So down the road, instead of, right now, we're using money from the levy to fund capital projects. Hopefully, we can come up with a different funding mechanism to fund those in the future. So again, this is why it's important to start the creation of those stabilization funds to grow, so we can plan for that time. And again, Colin, this is, you know, I consider this kind of worst case and really conservative, really low estimates on revenues and high estimate in expenses.
One more thing. One more question dealing with OPEB. Do I remember correctly that the retirement board approved extending out what I consider to be a delay in full funding the OPEB from fiscal year 2030 to fiscal year 2031? And they did that pursuant to discussion and a vote of the retirement board. So that's why theirs is fiscal year 31. Am I correct about that?
That was my recollection,
Okay.
yes.
Do you know, has the select board or the school committee gone through the same deliberate process of looking at the financial consequence and having a vote saying, yes, this is what we want to do? Do you know if either of those entities have done that?
Not to my knowledge, Kerry.
For OPEB?
For OPEB, yes. For extending up beyond fiscal year 2030.
No.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, this goes back a little bit to the question that Greg and Carlin were asking, but it's a little more general. I remember hearing in finance committee meetings a long time ago about a goal of maintaining a certain excess levy number, or percentage. That was considered a best practice. The number 4% sticks in my head, but maybe I'm wrong. Is there a best practice about how much room you should have in your levy limit? And if we end up having to go beyond it and get closer and closer to the levy limit, what are the implications for us?
So I'm not sure there's a best practice with that. I think it's a matter of the community's choice. I know that a lot of communities are taxed right up to the levy limit, and would love to be in the situation we have surplus levy room, but yeah, and I think, and Eric and I were talking about this today, I think that Concord, 4% was maybe a goal to maintain. You know, in looking at some of your old FinCom reports, I think you even projected that to go down. Right now, I think with this, it's probably a little over 3%, a hair over 3%. So it's definitely on the decline, which really goes into what you've been talking about for a number of years, is that it's going down, and we're getting closer to that point where we might tip the scales in the wrong direction.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anthony. This is really, really very helpful, and I have several questions. I'll begin with that 5-year forecast. wondering if you could do an exercise to back into a number that holds us, our levy, unused levy capacity constant, and then back into what the total spend would have to be. Then we can use that as part of our guideline process as an input. We can also present that to the town along the way, as kind of a yardstick of where we are. Second is, I just want to confirm an assumption I'm making that the capital plan is not included, the debt service for the capital plan is not included in the 5-year forecast, other than that 3%.
Yeah, it is. So I factored in the out years, both for the town and school. There's about, what did I use, about $800,000 a year in costs for that going forward. So I did include that in the projection.
Wonderful, wonderful. So that 389 million is included in, no?
No, not that, no.
No.
In the debt service.
The debt service on that is
Yeah.
included, though. That's my question.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Kind of tough to tell right now.
Yeah, I would doubt that
Yeah.
you've circled back on.
But it would be
right?
based on
Separate payments.
a goal of the $4 to $5 million that we borrow
Right.
every year.
Yes.
Okay, that's what,
Yes.
that's good, okay. All right, and I'm thinking that a summary of this would be really wonderful to include in the FinCom report. So I want to just throw that out there and get any feedback, and then if people agree, then I'll work with you on that.
We have the spreadsheets, sure. Happy
Awesome.
to share. I have shared them with Eric, and Lindsay has them too, and, you know, it's kind of a moving target, so as we make changes, we'll share them with the committee.
Okay, and the third one isn't so much for you directly, but your presentation prompted a memory, and I found it here on my computer. We get $475,000 of jet fuel tax, and last April, a resident wrote a wonderful letter to the Concord Bridge about that topic, suggesting or offering that if jet fuel, the jet fuel is taxed at 5%, and that comes back to 9 communities, that if that was taxed at the same percentage rate as our gasoline, it would add $1 million a year of revenue to Concord. And boy, that caught my eye. So I'm glad we have both town manager and a chair of the select board in the room, because that would seem to be something that's worth pursuing. And it says, according to the article, which is all that I know about the subject, I didn't do any independent research, that Rep. Cataldo and Senator Barrett are aware of the issue and are looking at alternatives.
If I can,
I had on that jet fuel thing, I mean, you see that they're going to increase the number of, flights, or wouldn't that would change the jet fuel numbers?
oh, good question. So with jet fuel, that, Select Board Member Ackerman has been all over this, and she's working with Chris from the town manager's office, and working with local services to actually determine how is that calculated. And we didn't get really clear answers, but they're working on getting us an answer for that. So, I'm not sure if it's based on the volume. I'm not sure if it's just based on the next size that's a moving target. But we are working on that to get nail that down to understand that a lot better than we do right now. Although we are grateful for the increase in revenue.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. I guess lastly, I'd ask about the pilot payments. What is the status of the
So at the last select board meeting, the working group, which consists of myself, the town manager, Lois, Mary Hartman behind me, and then our chief assessor, put together the first draft of the policy. And we just have to tweak it just a little bit, and planning on bringing that back to the next select board meeting. And I think they'll be prepared at that point to vote on that policy, and then we'll come up with a game plan on how we're gonna carry it out.
wonderful, thanks.
Bless you.
Thank you. Quasi?
Just one question. Your debt service for next year, it goes up and then it starts dropping. So I was wondering why that is.
That's,
And then
yeah, yeah.
So in fiscal '26, we have our first new debt service payment for the third issuance for the middle school. We issued that just a couple of months ago, but the debt service payment is not due till '26 for the first time. And then, it starts declining over time based on how the amortization of that debt. We do have, I think, $10 million or around $10 million left for the middle school, and that's not yet plugged in here. So it won't, once that's in, it won't come down.
Is it $10 million in the authorization?
Yes.
So we will end up borrowing the full authorization for the middle school?
Well, we don't know yet. No, it won't be the full, but we don't know exactly what it will be. So the last issuance will be when the project is closed out.
Okay, okay.
And just one clarification question. Your capital improvement plan is just, sticks out. Engineer, you have almost 80 million. What is that?
Those are the roads.
Those are the roads?
Yes.
Okay.
They fall under engineering and the public works.
Gotcha. Thanks.
John. Pat online. Pat, I saw you did have your hand up, but lowered it.
Oh, yeah, I did. And I would like to ask this if I may.
Please.
When Moody's made the gentle warning about our free cash flow, were they looking at the $9 million number, or were you already talking about what I thought I heard you project to be about 11 million?
So they looked at reserves and they looked at free cash. That was the certification, so they would have had that dollar amount too.
The 9.
So was
Yes,
the $9 million or
yes.
the 11, Anthony?
The 9.
The 9. Okay, so now if what I think I heard you say, not you, but our town manager say that it's 11, where is 9 in the range of 3 to 5? I don't want to do the math, I'm just lazy. And then where's 11?
So 5% is probably somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 7 million in between there. So, we're creeping up when we get to the 11 to almost close to the 10.
Okay, so I'm just throwing it out here. We're, to me, very well endowed in terms of free cash flow, certainly versus the ranges, and we're doing an excellent job in the unfunded liability side too, especially relative to our peers. So I'm hoping that can be some discussion about some wiggle room in those things. Okay, I'm just throwing it out there to the committee because, again, if Moody's doesn't ask us to be at that high level, even though I feel great that we are, maybe, again, some of that money can be allocated in some other way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, so we have wiggle room with OPEB because we control that. There's no law that says that it has to be funded on any particular schedule. With regard to the retirement system, we don't make that decision. The retirement system is independent of the town. There are 3 members of that system. The retirement board makes that decision, and there is a legal requirement for that liability to be funded. It's 2040 at the latest, but that's not a decision we can make in the town, but we can make the decision on OPEB, and if we do, I hope we have some good discussion about that, and maybe just touch base with our financial advisor and/or Moody's to get a read on, if we decided we wanted to cut that in half, what they think that might do to the rating, if anything.
Yeah, and Pat, just to add one other thing, yes, the free cash is going in the right direction. I'm thrilled for the community that it is. And as I mentioned, with those 3 large projects, being a public safety and a public works and even the roads, those projects would be debt exclusion projects. We could never fit those within the levy. And really, the thing is, especially the building projects, if we can start planning and tucking away some of that free cash when it gets above a level, then we can soften the blow on you, the residents, who we're gonna come to, and we're gonna ask you to vote, to raise your taxes for these buildings, and hopefully by saving some money, similar to what you did with the middle school, that we can soften that blow to the residents.
Excellent. Okay, I'm good.
So to follow up on that point, is it conceivable at some point that we bring there's an article at town meeting that says to borrow $5 million and appropriate $5 million out of our reserves to do a project.
You know, that'd be a great goal to have.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be a great goal to have. But that's really what we're, I'd really like to shoot for. And yeah, I'm really hoping to, obviously, Kerry and I haven't discussed this, but I'd love to see 2 warrant articles to really start those stabilization funds and using, once we get our number of free cash certification for this year, and hopefully it is at that high level at the 11 million, that we start tucking away some money into
Yep.
those funds and
Yep.
plan for that.
Yep, and also point out to the committee that we're earning interest on this money now. These days, not like the old days, so having a large balance is not a bad thing. Yeah.
Dee, last questions?
With this slide up on the screen, the capital improvement plan slide, do you have, and you said these are projects that are going to be completed in the next 10 years, can you provide a yearly, a chart that says year 1, year 2, year 3, and the projects and the costs associated with that? So it's more meaningful to the public, so that they can understand this is what's coming along, this is what you can expect.
Yeah, that is definitely our goal. So the 18th, so this is raw, unvetted. Kerry and I haven't talked about this yet. And, for the 18th, again, you're gonna have the raw data, but it'll be broken down into the various different groups, enterprise funds, et cetera. So you have an idea, but again, that's not exactly what's gonna be our final plan. That's just gonna be cleanup. This is what the asks for each of those areas are, and then in December, that would be our recommended capital plan.
You're recommending capital plan by year?
By year.
By year,
Yeah,
okay,
but
so-
we're really focusing on the 26. All the out years is we're planning, but, yeah, so we'll have out for 10 years.
Okay, and you'd have costs associated, what you.
Best guess estimates at
That's
this
it,
point,
okay.
yes.
Because I think this would be very important for the public to see, maybe at town meeting.
Yeah.
That a presentation on this, of this is what we're faced with coming along.
Yeah, and as Kerry mentioned, our new software, ClearGov, we're really working right now because we want to have that model out there so you, the taxpayer, can click, expand, look at those, look at what goes into each request, each ask, why do we do it? What's the policy? Why do we do what we do? It's all that's information that the department has done a really great job to show the residents what you're spending your money on, and it's not just, numbers. It's really meaningful, and it explains everything. At least right now on the town side that we know of. I'm sure the schools will do the same.
Okay?
Okay.
So we can say with confidence, we'd have something for that type of approach that you have, that people could look at for town meeting?
Oh, without a doubt.
No problem?
No problem.
Okay, all right.
One of our guiding principles in setting the guidelines is we don't want to go down the road of an override. That's one of our guiding principles. So I think Dawn's request is particularly noteworthy, modeling out staying under the levy limit. That to me is a key input for our guideline discussion. So ideally by the end of this month, if you could do that, that'd be super helpful for us.
Okay, I think I can work with Lindsay on something with that.
Okay.
So backing into a top.
Backing it, yeah.
Highlight, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just say thank you for the very detailed response. The write-up in our packet was very thorough, very responsive to our request. We really appreciate it. We know you're short-staffed at the moment, so it means a lot. Very helpful as we start to get serious about the guideline process.
Really, really great presentation. Thank you both.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Back to our agenda. Our next item is following up on our previous meeting, the FY26 presentations we got from the schools. That's Minuteman, CPS, and CCHS. We did have some follow-up questions for them that I sent over after the meeting. Minuteman We asked to see their capital plan, and their response was that they're working on it. They didn't have details, but they are working on it. The schools, we had a more detailed list of questions. We asked about OPEB. Colin, I hope you don't mind, you were the one who submitted that one. How they're planning for the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, the assessment. I asked to see examples of their performance metrics. They alluded to progress reports that they provide. I just asked to see examples. And then their per-student spending. They got back to us with, again, what I would say is a very responsive, detailed request. It's included in our packets. Did folks want to discuss the follow-up or the presentations themselves, since we had to move pretty fast at our last meeting?
Can I do one thing?
Yes.
Stormwater Fund. Okay. Now, I see that we happen to have the chair for the Public Works Commission here in the audience, Mr. Sven Weber. I was wondering if we might get some information about whether the school's estimate of the preliminary guidance for the impact seems reasonable.
So I can, if I don't, that came directly from Alan. I saw that correspondence that went back and.
He hasn't seen it yet, in other
Yeah,
words.
so that came from
Okay.
Alan to the schools.
Let me show him what it looks like.
I've got it up on the screen, too.
Yeah, could make sense.
So just the background. Just a background. We just had at the last Public Works Commission the first discussion about the general structure of the potential fees and the different options. And we gave back some feedback where the consultant firm working on that will come back to us around how this could be structured. The general idea is to have about 50% of the fees will be on residentials and 50% will be on non-residential properties. That's about how the land or the impervious area in Concord is distributed. So the goal, what we discuss, is to lower the fees for small residential properties and to make in general the curve depending on the volume or the amount of square footage of impervious area on a lot. The order of magnitude that is here seems consistent with different scenarios we discussed, but they are not finalized. There's also, and that is written in the bylaws of the Stormwater Enterprise, the opportunity to reduce these fees and get discounts for measures you do, what happens with stormwater on, let's say, your massive parking lot. So there will be a list of mitigating actions someone like a school or others can do to reduce these fees to in a maximum 50%. But generally, I would say this order of magnitude seems to be consistent with different scenarios. The final fee structure, again, we will prepare this in connection with the stormwater budget discussions on the enterprise side. But given we can only approve a fee after the budget is approved by the town meeting, the final fee structure can only be approved by the commission literally immediately after the town meeting. But we strive and try to make this as transparent as possible in the lead to the town meeting, and people understand, let's say, a $1 million stormwater enterprise fund translates in an anticipated fee structure and anticipated fee of X. And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem at the moment we are living on.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Other questions or points related to the information that the schools provided?
Well, just one point, which is, I echo what you said about detailed aspect of what they're giving us. And it's very different from the information we've gotten in prior years. This is a lot more transparency, just a lot more real information about what's going on in the schools. And I'm sure it took some effort for them to put it together, and it's very helpful.
Great. Great, and as we'll see, it was helpful. It was helpful information just generally to have, but it was also helpful to inform as we start to hone in on the guideline process for the modeling we're starting to do. Anyone else? Okay. With that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is good segue to the guideline process, taking an initial look at how the guideline we set will impact taxes. And this is something that Lindsay and Quasi worked with Anthony to tee up for tonight's meeting, and Quasi is going to walk us through it.
Sure.
Can I pull up the spreadsheet?
That's,
Okay.
That's great. So this is Lindsay's work. I'm just filling in for her. So maybe we'll start at the top. The maximum base levy that's fiscal year 2026, 113 million. I think our CFO provided background how we arrived at that. That's basically your prior year levy, times 2.5% and $1 million of new growth. And then, base levy assumption is about 110 million, and the delta is 3.7, and that's your excess levy capacity. So 3.7 million is your excess levy capacity. And then if we go to the second table, this basically is showing you, if you just look at the 20, I think you might have to zoom out a little bit, yeah, so that you can see 2026. I think that's the most relevant information. So if you look at the 2026, for town, it's going up by 3.9% from prior year. The CPS is about 2.92, and CCRSD is about 4.4%. So overall, the number that you should look at is the 3.57% increase from prior year. And also this on this model, we have taken out the tier 1 capital for the town and CPS, but we kept tier 1 capital for CCRSD because it was difficult to break it out, is what I was told. That's a shared with Carlisle. So it's a 3.57% increase, and then if we go to the tax impact chart, which is the meat of this, what you can see here, like if you look at the total property tax increment, exclusive of debt.
Can you zoom a little bit?
Zoom in.
Yeah, because
Zoom out. It's
I'm
really small.
blind over here. I don't know about the
can't-
ladies.
I'd wait till
Can't see.
till the video comes up before I can see this. We haven't seen this chart.
Yeah, thank you.
So the 2.94 million, so if we look at that, 2.94 million, that's basically your excess revenue that number is coming from Anthony, so that's 2.5 million. And what we have done is we increased that by about $100,000, from 2.5 to 2.6, 2.7, so $100,000 increment. And we wanted to see if we needed money beyond the 2.5 million that we have generated from the town, how much impact that would have on our excess levy capacity. So every $100,000, if you look at the first row, every $100,000 is about 9 basis points or 0.09%. and we have shaded in purple there, is in order to get to the 3.6 million, which is, going back to your chart on the top, 3.6 million is how much the town and the, the schools their budget without any adjustment. That's what they're, modeling. So that 3.6 million, if we're gonna need that money, that's gonna bring our excess levy capacity from 3.3 to about 2.3. So about 100 basis points or 1 percentage point. I don't know if everyone, yeah.
No, I just want to point out to everybody that there's no decision point to be made tonight. This is not, we're not going to be voting on this tonight. But what Lindsay and Quasi did is kind of peel back the hood and give you a sense of what the impact will be on the taxpayer and on our excess levy capacity, depending upon what decisions we make. So that's the point of this, is to just educate us about the process and the impact of the process, so that when we do, at our next meeting, is it the next meeting?
Mm-hmm.
At our next meeting, when we actually vote on the amount of the guideline, we're doing it with this background information. And we just had a conversation about how close we're going to be getting over time to needing an override. So I think focusing on excess levy capacity is a very good exercise for us.
And what, Quasi, just to clarify, what you're using as essentially placeholders for the guidelines for purposes of populating the model, what the budget units are telling us they'll need. So that's
Now,
not,
which may change.
Yeah,
right,
without
that's
any
not what
modification.
we're advocating. That's not the number we're going to be necessarily voting on next time.
Correct, yep.
What does this tell me 5 years from now?
We don't have 5 years from now, but what it is saying is, what it's saying is if we keep increasing the capacity, every $100,000 beyond what the town brings in, that number is dropping by about, 10 basis points. So if, for example, if we go down all the way to the bottom here, if the increase was, today they're asking for 3.6 million, but if that number was 5.7, then our levy capacity goes down to 0.5%.
Okay.
Or looking at it in reverse, again, to Don's point earlier, if we wanted to hold unused levy capacity constant, that's row 33. That's unused levy capacity consumes $0. So we'd be looking at an aggregate guideline of 2.44%.
Right.
Okay.
And that would be a constant?
Excellent point. That would keep the excess levy capacity the same as it is now, yeah. That would mean we're not going further into our levy.
Year over year over year. That's what I mean by, is this a constant that you're saying? Or is this just 1 year?
Just one, yeah, just for 1
Just
year.
1
Because
year.
the levy limit will go up with new growth and Prop 2.5 anyway. That'll continue to ratchet up.
Okay. Hopefully.
May I?
Yes.
The soundbite from that presentation that I'm going to remember is that every $100,000 of spend either, above, whether after we've set the limit, et cetera, every $100,000 brings us 10 basis points closer to zero.
Correct.
And that's hugely helpful when we're talking and deliberating. So thank you very, very much. As we're looking at budget requests that are in excess of guidelines, we'll know the piggy bank is really low. Okay, thanks.
Other thoughts or discussion?
I have one. And, we took, for those of you who are new members who weren't at the town meeting where we argued with the high school and we lost, we pushed the high school to come in at the guideline number, and they came in I don't have the numbers in front of me, but about $150,000 over. That's
One thirty, we thought earlier,
Yeah.
we thought.
Right, and-
Somewhere around there, yeah.
And there was a certain amount of, we took some heat over that. There were people saying, some of my friends, to me, saying, it's a small number, why are you making such a fuss over it? It's not a small number.
It's not a small number.
And, then the argument back to that is, as a percentage of their overall budget, the schools' combined budgets are 70 million a year? I mean, at CCHRS, our share is what, 30 million a year, 40 million a year? As a percentage of their budgets, it's not a big number to ask them to find savings in. And it is a number that has significance. So we took some heat over that, and town meeting voted the budget the schools asked for, so that's fine, and we're all here now. But as you're thinking about these things, and as we're going into town meeting and hopefully having a different experience this year, hopefully having the experience where the budgeting entities come in at guideline or are able to explain very specific needs that force us to push things a little bit. But keep that in mind. They're not small numbers when you look at what we're dealing with. So.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, our next meeting will be a big one in the context of guidelines. That's where, again, we'll vote on preliminary guidelines. So thank you, Quasi. That was great. This is a lot of work by you, by Anthony, by Lindsay, who couldn't be here. So thank you.
Quasi, what do you think about all this?
Thank you. That's a very general question. Think about the
This work that you were doing.
So where I'm I guess a little unsure is this levy limit, so I'm hearing what he's saying, right? That, other towns are going, lower towards zero, but we're maintaining certain level. And then you ask the question, is that level 4? Is that 3? What is the what's the limit? So I'm not sure. What are we trying to maintain? Are we trying to maintain within, a 3%?
I think, I can't answer that. And I don't know if that's actually the question we should be asking. I think we should be looking at the fact that more than 90% of the town's revenues come from property taxes. Property taxes have been going up substantially every year. What this process does not capture is all of the borrowing costs in excess of the levy limit, which are substantial. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be aware that these decisions that we're making, you could push it to the levy limit, but then you're starting next year on that higher base. And we're already in a situation where we're projecting increases of 8%, 7 point something percent a year in property taxes, because until and unless we develop some of these other revenue sources, that's where the money comes from. So I think it's part of our role as a finance committee to be sensitive to that and sensitive to the burden that's being put on the residential taxpayers. So I don't know that if Moody's isn't going to drop our bond rating dramatically if we come that close to our levy limit, then that's not a factor, and other towns do that. But other towns are having overrides, and they're controversial, and often they pass. I think often than not they pass. Sometimes they don't, and if they don't, you're really in a world of hurt trying to now manage to this number that nobody has budgeted to. So I think we have an obligation to look at the larger picture, and I don't think just thinking about the percentage we are from the levy limit is the right calculation. I was curious as to whether or not there was any best practices guidance that municipal governments look to in making these decisions, and Anthony answered the question. So.
But then, Louis, my question would be then we listened to the Economic Vitality Committee, so I didn't see any, they're working on strategies. So the revenue side is I'm not seeing a lot of things coming through the pipeline, and expenses. And then on the expenses, it seems like every year it's going up, and town is voting, for it. So what, like, something has to give. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the town is here, and they're hearing our discussion about this. How do we convey this information to the schools?
The schools will follow up. I don't know if there's anybody from the schools online right now.
Pat's a school liaison. She's got her hand up too.
Okay.
Okay, let me go to Pat's had her hand up, and then Dawn. Pat?
Yes, I just want to remind everyone that we did have that fabulous presentation by Lindsay that looked at national numbers. And if we go back to that, as I recall, those national numbers were not pointing to 3.56%. So to the point of the bigger picture, I think we need to resolve that in our discussions. As I recall, the number was something like 3.26%, when there was some taking into account inflation, taking into account real personal income growth. Because remember, property tax increases come from income increases. So if you have a population of people who are living on Social Security, which increases very softly, currently it's projected at 2.5% for next year, and you know that their IRA and pension distributions are also fixed, we have to be really careful that we don't not take into consideration the work that we did some months ago that Lindsay presented, where the number is actually lower.
Well, that's a good point, and the metrics are in this chart that we're looking at.
Yep, I got them up on the
Because what
screen.
you're describing, Pat, is the metrics we came up with, and that were based on publicly available data. So, yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, Dawn?
We've had some, in the years past, we've had some ad hoc discussion of what's the right level of, minimum level of free cash, and without really establishing a policy. I'm getting the sense that this is another topic similar in that vein, and that these two are something we should have a discussion about absent the town meeting, right? And then have an official policy of our own voting, right? That we vote on and say, the FinCom's policy is that free cash should never be below 5% of the spending, and we shouldn't be within 4% or something of our levy limit, something of that sort, so that we could then tell the town, we're in the red zone here, and this is why we've drawn the line on spending. So that would be something I would suggest for discussion, and it doesn't have to be a long discussion, I think, and then perhaps a vote on where we come down.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you on that, but what aside from pointing us to an override, what is the, with free cash, it's an input to our bond rating, so it's serious business. But with the levy, the unused levy capacity, aside from the override issue, what are the other risks, or are there other risks?
There are, in that when towns, I would say by best practice, when towns are consistently up against their levy limit, they start playing games, creating enterprise funds where we didn't have one before. That's my favorite example.
Yeah, I know that example.
And it is a backdoor way of taking funding out of the public's purview. And so that's one thing. Another, though, is good fiscal governance, which is our mandate. I think, too, and it doesn't hold much sway with me to say, well, other towns do it. Well, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So I think we this is one of our fundamental responsibilities, and we should we should have a formal, I think, discussion about where our position stands. That's all.
I agree with that. also think, picking up on Pat's point again a little bit, one of our mandates, or what, I don't know that it's a formal mandate, one of the things we've always thought about is making sure that our guidelines are at a level where we're supporting at least a level, a sustained level of service, that we're not unaware of the needs that the budgeting entities have to be able to provide a particular level of service. We're asking them to provide that service efficiently, but we're not asking them to cut back. So that's why we do the metrics process first, to get a sense of that.
Sure, but I don't think that a level service is part of our mandate. In other words.
It's not part of our mandate, but it's one of the things that we keep in mind when we're evaluating the requests that are being made in the presentations.
Of course, yes,
You know.
true. But if the costs of providing a level service exceed our ability to fund it, then we have to have a discussion of what we're not going to do.
Right,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah, I agree.
I think one of the services we can do as liaisons to the various committees is to encourage them to temper their expectations. Because starting now may help extend the life of our current excess capacity limit. But that's encouraging the various departments and the various committees that we're on to say, we're going to be facing an override, and if we do that, we're going to be expecting you to help support it, or at least answer what you've done up until this time to show that you've tried to avoid this. Because without that, we're not going to be able to have our revenue meet the expenses we have. It just won't work. It's not there.
And one more point that raises in my mind is that we've had discussion about having a single budget at town meeting for the, rather than, because it's really difficult to say, this one gets this and this one gets that. Has there been any further discussion outside of this group on that?
On having a unified, well, the chair of the select board is here, does she want to speak to that? Don's question was, we had discussed last year the possibility of doing a unified budget where town meeting approves a single budget that covers town and schools. And we haven't heard anything further about that. The idea was abandoned for last year.
I haven't heard anything about it either.
Okay.
Thank you.
So where are we?
We are moving to the next, unless there's any more discussion of this, we are moving to our next agenda item, which I think is discussing the roadmap for doing a joint Concord Carlisle School District guideline with the Carlisle Finance Committee.
Well, before we do that, what is the outcome of this last discussion?
I think it's future agenda item.
Yeah.
Future agenda item.
I'm taking my notes on action items, and I'm gonna flag that for our next meeting. It's certainly timely. Discussion on a FinCom policy related to unused levy capacity. Okay. All right, our last substantive agenda item is what Lois said. Our roadmap for developing a joint guideline for CCHS with Carlisle, following up on our discussion at our last meeting, our joint meeting with Carlisle. After that meeting, I worked with James Cataccio, the chair in Carlisle, with very helpful input from Lois and Lindsay to pull together that roadmap. Let me pull it up on the screen. We tried to keep it very short and sweet, just laying out how we envision this working this year, assuming we want to go down this road together. It summarizes the background, the approach, and probably most importantly, the timing for making this work. And what we settled on, in a nutshell, is we, Concord, will proceed with our process as planned, since we already have a documented, robust process in place. Carlisle certainly has a process, but it's a little less formal and a little less established. than what we use. So assuming we vote on a preliminary guideline at our next meeting, November 21st, we will share that with Carlisle. They'll have the opportunity to review it and discuss it as the Carlisle Finance Committee and get back to us with their input. Either they agree with it, they disagree, they want to suggest an alternative, and that will be part of the universe of feedback we get on the preliminary guideline when it comes time to turn around and establish our final guideline, which we're scheduled to do at the end of December, or December 19th. So we're basically adding a step in our already established process for Carlisle to agree or not to the number we arrive at for CCHS.
And was there also a place for the discussion of both Carlisle and Concord having the same percentage?
Percentage or guideline number?
Guideline number. Guideline.
Do you mean literally a venue for us to get together and talk through it again?
No, I just, in your process, we come up with our guideline, submit it to them, and the Carlisle Finance Committee has an opportunity to examine that, make comments on it, and then get back to us. And I'm just wondering, was the objective of our meeting before and the tone to result in a common guideline for the two towns?
Yes, for CCHS only.
Correct. So that is still the objective?
That is the objective. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Are you going to be attending the Carlisle Finance Committee meeting in case they have questions about how we came up with our guidelines?
We admittedly didn't think of that, but I think that's a great idea. I think that would be appropriate.
Or someone else could do it if you're not available.
Yes, I think we should have somebody on hand.
We'll go over.
Yeah, somebody should be on
There's
hand
something about
for
numbers.
their discussion. They're meeting right now, separately from us, of course, to have this same discussion, to make sure they, as a committee, are on board with this approach.
Okay, okay.
Okay? My sense of the committee is
Thumbs up.
we're on board with this approach. Great. Okay. Well, with that, that's our agenda for tonight. We don't have minutes to review and approve. We'll do that at our next meeting. Liaison updates, we elected to defer those since we just did those 2 weeks ago. We'll do those on the 21st as well.
And thank you for sending out the minutes that you have categorized and all of the emails that you send out in terms of what we have written to you or commented to you about. I think it's been very helpful to have that.
Great. Thank you. Our next meeting, no meetings next week, but the week after that, we've got 2 meetings. We've got our joint capital planning meeting with the select board and the schools on Monday, the 18th. There's a small typo in our agenda. It's not Thursday, the 18th. It's Monday, the 18th at 6 p.m. And then we're going to reconvene solo as the Concord Finance Committee on Thursday, the 21st. And that's when we'll vote on the preliminary guideline.
So there's no meeting of our Finance Committee separate and apart from the Select Board Committee on the 18th?
No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah, we don't have that in the calendar.
Yeah, what is on the 18th?
Capital Planning Forum.
The 18th is the joint meeting with the select board and the schools for capital planning.
And that's
Select
here.
Board, Schools, and Finance Committee.
That's here. I assume it'll be in the other room, just because it's such a big group, but that'll be here in this building.
So Select Board,
In the big room.
Finance Committee, and...
I'll send out the schedule. It hasn't changed, but just so it's front of mind for everybody. Pull it up quickly here.
Are you gonna put one for the 18th on our schedules?
I will, yes.
Okay, because you have one for the 21st.
All right, I'll shoot that out tomorrow.
Yeah.
And Eric, don't remember, do we have a meeting planned for December 5?
We previously did, but we adjusted the schedule and that dropped off.
But that is on the town's calendar. That was approved at the last select board meeting, I believe, December 5 meeting for finance committee.
You're right.
I
Okay.
noted that during the select board when you were going through the calendar. You might want to think about that, Anthony. If we're not planning to show up and you're planning for us to show up, we're going to have a problem.
We'll clean that up. We'll clean that up.
We'll go through that.
That, recall, we had this come up before where Anthony, very proactively, I appreciate it, he put out placeholders for meetings based on the original draft of the schedule, and then the schedule changed. So we just have to reconcile those.
That's why I still have it in my calendar.
Yes,
If I try and delete it, I get a notice that says you can't.
We'll go through that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll
Okay,
take
so
it
no
back.
meeting December 5, got it.
Yep, no meeting, as of now, no meeting December 5. So
Thank you.
again, I'll redistribute the schedule. We've got November 18th, November 21st, December 16th,
December 19th.
and December 19th.
December 16th, we have a meeting?
December 16th is another joint meeting.
Join me with select board and capital.
That one's not in my calendar.
Yeah, that's not on my calendar either.
Okay,
I'll shoot that out tomorrow, too. I put a note already on that.
Okay.
minutes, oh God, my head's going to explode.
And December 5th, no meetings, right? So we can
Right,
decline that.
We'll
Right.
take that.
Okay, thank you.
So what would be the start times? Are they still going to be 6:30 for the 2 November meetings?
the joint meeting, it's 6 o'clock. I'm not sure when the actual capital planning, I know the select board has other stuff to cover that night, but their meeting kicks off at 6, so it could be as early as 6. We'll get that nailed down in the next week. Okay. Let me just quickly run through our action items. Going in order based on what we covered in tonight's meeting. Colin and I will get together on the correspondence we received from Mr. Eshavari to determine what's relevant for the Finance Committee and what should be referred elsewhere. I will follow up with Mike Lawson on what inputs he may need from the Finance Committee. Recall he asked us for data on economic vitality. Per Dawn's request, Anthony will take a look at modeling budget projections holding unused levy capacity constant.
At what value? At today's
At,
value?
is that your intention?
Yeah.
Yeah,
9 million?
at FY '25's value.
Not 9 million, it's the levy.
That's a percentage of the anticipated levy capacity rather than.
Yes.
A solid number.
Yep. This was implicit in our discussion. We didn't say this out loud. The guidelines subcommittee, Quasi and Lindsay, will tee up preliminary guideline scenarios for us to consider and ideally vote on the 21st. Also, per Dawn's point, for our next meeting on November 21st, we will add an agenda item for discussion on establishing a Finance Committee policy on unused levy capacity.
Do we have one right now in free cash?
With free cash, there really are best
Is,
practices.
but I'm asking, does Concord has a policy, correct? Yeah. Can we have that for the next meeting? Because
Okay.
Concord has a policy for free cash already.
Okay.
Right.
And then lastly, a housekeeping item, Anthony and I will work to clean up the invites so that it aligns with the schedule. Is that everything?
I think so.
Okay, great. Pat, you good online?
I am here.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, everyone.